Sustainable Development Goals. The International Federation of Accountants has selected Mr. Paul Drachman of the United Kingdom as the 2021 recipient of the IFAC Global Leadership Award, recognizing his contributions to the advancement of the global accountancy profession and capital markets. Mr. Drachman, camera is yours.
Okay. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm very grateful for that opening. And since I only got that award, it was only announced yesterday, I think I'm surprised that you knew. But it labels me as an accountant, which is either good or bad. But nonetheless, I will try to say something inspirational, shall we say, in these next 15 minutes or so. I do have to acknowledge the wonderful work that Professor Gula Aras and the Turkish Integrated Reporting Council has done over the years, where Turkey has been a leading light in looking at certainly corporate reporting in the right sense, and I applaud all of their work. I wanted to start. I was at COP26 the week before last, and it was quite a there are things where I'm very optimistic and areas where I'm sort of slightly worried and pessimistic. But I do think that reflection on COP26 is worthwhile delivering to you with this view of investors and the capital markets. And I'm going to start unusually, if you don't mind, by referring to this book, Sapiens by Professor Harari. And I'm sure many people have seen and read the book. I see Rose is smiling because she's obviously had a look. But what the book describes is why the human race actually dominated as the species on our planet. And in many ways, as I see it, it was around storytelling, which was our specialism. And that storytelling enabled us to inhabit an imagined world, a world created from our ideas, which we take as real and we're able to execute on. And it is through shared stories that we have been able to create nations and capitalism and human rights and all of those other things. But whilst talking about storytelling, I'm now going to refer you to another book called The Lorax. And The Lorax, this is actually the 50th anniversary year of The Lorax, is a children's story. And it's a children's story with a bit of a bite, because what it talks about in The Lorax is the fact that they had this wonderful region where they were full of what I would call truffler trees, which is, don't forget, it's a children's story, and beautiful truffler trees, and everybody lived incredibly happily. But one of the inhabitants wanted more things. And because of that, they started to cut down the truffler trees in order to get more things. And of course, what happened was they cut down all the truffler trees and nobody could live in that region anymore. But it's a children's story, so it ends happily ever after, because the last seeds of the truffler trees are handed to a young child. And the young child is told to go and replenish, regenerate, and restore the area with truffler trees so that the inhabitants could come back and live happily ever after. And I think my message out of COP26 comes out of that, is that if we're not careful, we are planning to leave it to the children rather than to take the responsibility ourselves. Now, I have spent the last I'm supposed to have shared my screen, excuse me. I've spent the last 2 decades of my life looking at ESG for originally accountants and then capital markets as a whole. And I have to say, over the last couple of weeks, I am truly excited, perhaps not as excited as the little girl who reminds me of my granddaughter, or the little dog that reminds me of my cockapoo. But nonetheless, there is an excitement out there in my world of corporate reporting and what flows from that. Because at COP26 was the announcement that we're going to have global mandatory sustainability reporting. And that is very exciting. I have my concerns over some of what is actually going to be in the standards, but nonetheless, let's not be negative. It is very, very, very exciting. The new International Sustainability Standards Board is coming to fruition as a sister board for the international accounting standards, where balance sheets and financial statements are delivered. And of course, there's also work going on in the European Union, which I will talk to. We see companies that are far more embedding ESG into their business plans and into their DNA. Organizations like Accounting for Sustainability and others are demonstrating, showcasing how to do these sorts of things. And then there are corporate governance codes, and I know you're going to hear from Professor Mervyn King, my old chairman at the IRC. And Mervyn, is the sort of the originator of the core of corporate governance codes in his series of King codes. But it is the biggest change in the last year or 18 months has been the grasp by investors of ESG. Now, in my mind, all the big players in the investment cycle, that's from the asset owners to the asset managers to the consultants and the service providers around, are embedding ESG into their portfolios and into how they work. And the announcement by Mark Carney in COP26 about the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, where he claimed $130 trillion worth of investments going in, is something that we should be excited about. And I truly am, frankly. However, when we're telling stories, are we actually telling stories that are just not achievable? In other words, can we say that if you invest in an ESG way, we're going to create alpha? Well, I think that's doubtful. It doesn't mean you can't create alpha, but it does mean you still need good companies to be doing good things. And I think that is an issue. And as the controversial Tarek Fancy of formerly of BlackRock talks about, he said it is actually ESG just a societal placebo. In other words, are we thinking we're doing the right thing, but at the end of the day, we won't be achieving what we set out to do? And that does concern me quite significantly. Which really leads into the second half of what I wanted to talk about. And that is, the first 2 decades have been dedicated to ESG and telling the story. I think what we need to do I need to do in the 3rd decade is actually challenge what I would call accountability, not just accounting and reporting and the usual thing, but actually let's understand trying to get through this idea that it isn't a placebo, it's actually the real vaccine that we're having put into our arms. If you look at, we're all so pleased that GDP is increasing, okay, or after some of the worst effects of the lockdown. But can we have an increase in GDP whilst at the same time having a dramatic reduction in carbon emissions? Is it possible to do increase in growth at the same time as dramatically reduce carbon emissions? Well, it is very unproven. The idea of decoupling is something that I think is very challenging, and we should understand that. In fact, there's a lovely saying, which I'm going to modify for this audience was that if anybody who believes in exponential growth can go on, that exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world, is either a madman or an investor. It was originally for economists, but I've modified it. And so what that leads me then to bring on, to talk to, is that in fact, we in the capital markets have such a responsibility. The Edelman Trust Barometer of 2021, this huge survey of both of people who are both informed and uninformed society. The only trusted institution is us, the business and the capital markets. No other institution is trusted to deliver, not just on climate change and other impacts, but overall, that they believe what we say. And to borrow another phrase from Mervyn King, we need to make sure that our capital markets are a part of society, not apart from society. Now, in the introduction, there was a little bit on the World Benchmarking Alliance, which I'm honoured to chair. But what we are doing is creating an accountability mechanism against the SDGs. So this isn't ESG. This has nothing to do with enterprise value. It's how are we as the capital markets and the investors actually delivering against the SDGs? And the original findings of our benchmarks are starting to become very deeply worrying. Because if you take the just transition, only 14% of the companies have any of the fundamentals of just transition planning in anything that they have made transparent to the world. If you look at oil and gas benchmark, only 7% of the capital expenditure of the oil and gas companies, 100 of them in our benchmark, only 7% of their capex is spent on low carbon technology. It's huge, but it isn't significant as it needs to be. And there are many other examples that I can bring forward. And I'd also refer you to Paul Polman's new book called Net Positive. And in Paul Polman's new book, he actually talks about that net positive is about replenish, regenerate, restore. And that we need to have business at the center of what we do. And in fact, one of the great quotes from that book is that a company, which I include the financial services and the investment organizations, have to say to themselves, is the world a better place because your organization is in it? Okay, so we need to think that through. So if I had calls to action, I would just choose three, right? Three of many, but three. Investors, we have to stop the companies that we invest in aggressively lobbying against sustainability. It happens. We know it happens. And we should not be investing in companies that do that, or at least have a strong enough engagement to stop it. Government action needs to leverage the capital markets. And just as in the G20, the companies, the G20 created a minimum, seems to be some back noise here, the G20 created a minimum tax rate for corporate tax of 15%. Let's have global carbon taxes. We need it to make these things happen. And my last point, my last call for action would be about using accountability mechanisms that are not necessarily the ones that we're used to using at the moment. So how would I conclude? Well, I would conclude that I do believe that at COP26 and leading up to certainly the last year, we have lit a torch. You know, with ESG, we have truly lit a torch. Let me go back. Truly lit a torch. What we've got to do is to make sure that it's not just a torch, but it's floodlights, that it creates a real change in what we're doing. Because after all, ladies and gentlemen, we must step up, as climate change has no vaccine, and we cannot socially distance from inequality. That was my opening gambit for the panel. I hope you found that interesting. If I'm sure there'll be others who would like to contradict or make comments about it, but I hope that that's a useful introduction. And I'll pass back to one of my heroes, Professor Gula.
Thank you very much, Paul. It is really, really eye-opening and guiding presentation, as always. I would like to also congratulate you about the latest news I just received last night. You are the Ifac Global Leadership. You have an Ifac Global Leadership Award, which is very, very important. Ifac is International Federation of Accountants, has selected Paul of the United Kingdom as the 2021 recipient of the Ifac Global Leadership Award. Thank you very much and congratulations for your great achievement. It is not first, it is not last. I'm sure we will hear a lot of good news about in the future. So again, thank you for your guiding, really, really guiding presentation for us. Very, very important because we have a lot of homework after your speech. And I'm sure that we will discuss after you with our distinguished speakers at the panel discussion. So thanks again. I would like to start our panel discussion with three very, very valuable guests. First one is Paul Andrews. He is from CFA Institute, Managing Director. He is also previously served as a Secretary General of International Organization of Security Commissions, ISCO. And second guest, Eduardo Garcia Hidalgo. He is also CFA charter holder and he's Global Chief Investment Officer, BBVA Asset Management. And our last guest is Rose S. Easton. She is from PRI, Signatory Relationship Director of Northern Europe, Middle East, and Africa, including Turkey as well. So before we start our panel discussion, I would like to raise a small question for all participants. This is my question. Is a better return possible? Is it possible to get better return? And how it's possible? Do you have any, think about it, idea about that? Is the corporate performance indicators financials only or more? I think we will discuss with our guest today. They are representing capital markets, corporate side, advisory, asset management, and academic backgrounds. And let's start with the first round with Rose Easton. Rose, as we all know, the risk profile of the world has been changed dramatically. Climate change, especially now, is the most critical and growing business risk. And investors are increasingly demanding more information about ESG risk from institutions and investing in companies that can manage risk well. We can also clearly see the tendency of the investors in this regard, the number of companies that signed the PRI and the momentum experienced in the volume of funds they have managed. So the number of PRI signatories exceeded over 4,500. It is a huge number if you compare like 2 years ago, it was about just half of the number. And they are managing $120 trillion. So how do you evaluate this momentous growth in responsible investment environment? What are the drivers of this growing interest? And as the largest global network of the institutional investors considering ESG issues, how do PRI works with investors? Rose.
Thank you, Doc. Oh, got some. Thank you, Dr. Gula, for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's an absolute honor to be involved in the Turkish Capital Markets Summit, so thank you. So just taking a step back in terms of why invest responsibly. Clearly, responsible investment is a strategy and a practice to incorporate environmental, social, and governance factors into your investment decisions and into active ownership. And this is to better manage risk and generate sustainable long-term returns. And there is increasing recognition, as Dr. Agulu, you've just alluded to, that the financial community are integrating material ESG factors into investment decision-making processes more and more, and that actually this is going to have a material positive impact on investment performance and accumulation over time, which perhaps addresses some of your earlier questions. In terms of drivers, I think three key reasons for such significant growth in responsible investment. Firstly, just in the growing client demand coming from both the beneficiaries and investors looking for greater transparency about how and where their money is being invested. And this has been evidenced by the PRI asset owner signatories, who say that 83% have actively been including ESG criteria now in their RFPs. Secondly, there's been a significant increase in responsible investment regulation, particularly since the 2008 GFC, driven by a realization that the financial sector actually has got a really important role to play in meeting some of these global challenges, such as climate change and actually things like modern slavery. And indeed, that by incorporating ESG factors is a key part of an investor's fiduciary duty to do so. And then the third key reason, I think, for this growth is there is actually growing empirical and academic evidence that ESG incorporation by corporates does not come at a cost to them. You know, the PRI have done an analysis of over 2,000 academic studies since 1970 and found that there was 63% found a positive link between a company's ESG performance and its financial performance, with only 10% finding a negative link. So companies that do the right thing will generate greater value. And as Paul just said, through ESG integration ESG integration by investors won't though work by itself. It has to be coming from the companies themselves. And actually the investment managers who are doing the analysis, if they neglect ESG, in itself will cause mispricing of risk, and that will result in poor asset allocation and ultimately in a failure of fiduciary duty. So those companies and those investors that don't take this seriously will get left behind. And just to answer your final part of your question, Dr. Gula, how does the PRI work with investors? Well, I'll keep this very brief, but we are an investor-led organization. We're supported by the United Nations, and we work with our international network of signatories to put 6 key principles for responsible investment into practice. And the PRI provides the support to our signatories to integrate these ESG issues into their investment and into their ownership decisions. And we do that principally by 3 key things: through education, through collaboration, and through insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I think these developments in the global risk profile and investment environment caused significant change in the finance function and profession. In this way, I would like to move to Paul Andrews. Let's consider the issue from the perspective of the finance. Paul, you have actually a lot of hats. You are managing director of CFA Institute. Also, you were previously served as Secretary General of International Organization of Securities Commission, ISCO. You know the market, actors. So today we know that a crucial adapt of value creation perspective is very, very important. It's getting more important because adoption, the perspective of creating value from the board side also maximize the value created by the finance function. I would like to share the very small research before your question. According to the recent survey conducted by the Big Four accounting companies, 69% of CFOs regularly deal with sustainability and ESG matter and reporting, in addition to enterprise risk, business resilience, and corporate strategy. So therefore, CFOs have become forward-looking ambassador beside the role of interpreting the advising of financial risk and performance data. And CFO have a fiduciary duty of to respond to ESG impact that are increasingly recognized as financially material and drive outcomes for the business. So as the representative of CFA Institute, which serves for building a better world for investors through leading the finance professionals, thinking in the areas such as ethics, capital market integrity, and excellence of practice, how do you interpret this momentum? And also, how does CFA Institute prepare finance professionals in this direction? Paul, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And let me say what a pleasure it is, like Rose, to be part of the summit today and to be on the panel with Eduardo and Rose and to listen to Paul Druckmann. So thank you for the question. I think it's a very interesting one. And to some extent, it goes to something Paul Druckmann said, in my view. It's around accountability and how we are accountable at CFA Institute in our mission to the industry. And one of the things that we're passionate about is focusing on this issue of sustainability in its various different forms. One of the things we're planning to do during the course of this year is continue on with some thought leadership around many aspects of the ESG, of ESG issues, which we hope will be inspirational to some extent to markets around the world, particularly in the emerging market world. But at the same time, we've already done quite a bit in terms of ESG related matters. So let me give you a couple of examples. At the beginning of the month, at the beginning of this month, in time for COP26, we issued some final product disclosure standards, which are very global in nature. And it's an effort to standardize, to some extent, across the world, how product disclosures are made by institutions that are selling and marketing ESG-related products. One of the aspects of that is and it's an interesting question that I hope we have time to get into, is in this move towards focusing on ESG, about being very, very careful about greenwashing. And I think that's a topic that deserves perhaps some of its own time and attention, because I think we have to be careful about the rush of running towards ESG related matters, but not pay attention to the greenwashing issue. And our product disclosure standards are an effort to address that in a global way. That's one aspect of what we're doing. Another aspect of what we're doing is, many people know the CFA Institute because of the CFA charter and the 3-level exam. We are working and have had in our curriculum for a while now, ESG related learnings that charter holders must master to be able to pass the specific aspects of that CFA exam. The third component of what we're doing is we developed, I should say, in connection or in cooperation with our society in the UK, an ESG certificate, which is an effort to concentrate study of ESG matters in its own academic certificate approach. And we're continuing to do more. We're investigating other certificates around it, so that we can continue to help educate the industry in a way that we think will be helpful and useful, both from a theoretical point of view, but also from a practical point of view. I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I have to move to Eduardo, because to understand the investor's perspective in implementation in this first round, time to ask my question for Eduardo, because he comes from a practical side. He's Chief Global Chief Investment Officer at BBVA Asset Management. Eduardo, according to another recent survey I would like to share with you, again conducted by the Big Four accounting firms, there was a sharp increase in interest in the investor focus on sustainability following the events of the past year, with 90% of investors reporting attaching greater importance to companies' ESG performance when it comes to their investment strategy and decision-making since the COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, 86% of the participants said they are more likely to hold an investment based on strong ESG performance. So I wonder your perspective as a representative of the PRI signatory company, and also you are CFA charter holder. What are the motivation of institutional investors behind adopting ESG investment strategies? Could you please share your BBVA experience about the implementation process, and especially focusing on the importance of qualified and specialized ESG analysis and proactive company engagement in action? Eduardo.
Yes, certainly. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm only sorry I couldn't make it to Istanbul this time, but let's hope there are opportunities in the future to go back to Istanbul. Yes, I think it's clear we've seen a big increase in investor sensitivity and appetite for sustainable investing. Up to I would say 2 years ago, in our main markets, the interest in these issues was very centered on institutional investors. We ran a number of company pension funds for large Spanish and Mexican companies mostly, and on that front, the conversation was already there. Our BBVA's company pension fund was one of the first UNPRI signatories in Spain, and on that front, I think things were moving at a certain pace. But as you said, over the last couple of years, we are seeing an increase in interest, even from the retail and private banking client base, which is certainly new. And I think the pandemic, and certainly, you know, the more ambitious talk on environmental issues at the political and social level has had an impact on that front, and we are seeing a big change in that. I mean, I think regulation should be mentioned as well, particularly for us operating within the European Union. I think the ambition and the complexity of regulation on sustainable investing in the European Union sphere has also changed. I think for the better in terms of the ambition. I'm not so sure about if it's for the better or for the worse in terms of the complexity. I will need to find that out in the next few years. But certainly things have speeded up. So I think there is more interest. Certainly we are seeing inflows even in the retail space into sustainable theme funds, and I think it's something that is going to continue. In terms of what this implies for the skill set, let's say, of analysts and portfolio managers, it's a big change, and we don't think this is about setting up a small team of specialists, although we do have a team of specialists. It is more about committing ourselves to reskill and update the entire investment teams, building ESG knowledge for as many members of the investment team as possible in several at several levels. The most basic one, which I think most people are already past at this point, is to build awareness and knowledge about the aspects related to ESG investing. Then we need to build knowledge about the existing and forthcoming regulations and understand the implications for our investment processes, products, and ultimately to our clients. And then we need to expand the analyst and portfolio managers toolbox so that they know how to integrate ESG data in the decision-making process. And I think here data is an important issue. To understand well the quality and the limits of the data we are using is very relevant. And finally, but also very important, is to provide the analysts and portfolio managers the framework used to incorporate ESG issues to the dialogue they have with the companies they follow and invest in.
Thank you, Eduardo. Actually, at the first round, we'll be happy to hear different perspective from PRI side, from capital markets side, and financial professionals. After discussing the trends and growth in the investment environment in the first round, I would like to focus on the future. So, Paul, can I start with you? CFA Institute has made a significant contribution to the development of the investment environment, especially with the ESG focused studies. I saw very last one is the global ESG disclosure standards for investment products, which is the first voluntary set of reporting standards for the investment industry. I recommend all audience actually related with capital market. With this publication, the increase in greenwashing is also addressed. How do you evaluate the change in the company's ESG, sustainability, and stewardship commitments and their reflection on the markets? Especially, what are your predictions for the future of the ESG investment ecosystem, and what do you think about future of the finance professions?
Well, it's a very broad and challenging question, because always predicting the future is always a difficult task to undertake. But I'll do my best to answer your question. I mean, it just seems to me, and based on what Rose has said, what Eduardo has said, what Paul Druckmann said, the momentum is just moving exponentially, I think, at this time. And I think you will continue to see a huge growth in attention and focus on the investment decisions that institutions make and individuals make when it comes to giving voice to their interest in ESG. And it's a very interesting dynamic between being concerned about valuation of assets, valuation of shares, valuation of capital. But then juxtaposed against that is about our values. And the entire ESG movement is an effort, in my view at least, to marry the two aspects. So it's not only about valuation, but it's about values and what we hold important and why we hold it important. And I think, Paul Druckmann probably said it best, is that we should not leave this decision to our children. The time is now. And I think we're all acting with some sense of urgency because we recognize that. And I'm hopeful that together we will make a very, very significant difference. So I think the future holds what we see today, but even more so. So I see it going like this.
Thank you. It's a very interesting point of view in a short time. Thank you for your concise discussion. Eduardo, can I continue with you? Actually, I will ask the latest development about your area. The most important point were integrated reporting. As you know, the latest news, just before our session, they mentioned the big merger, which is integrated reporting based on integrated thinking differs from existing reporting chains. Is that it provides a framework for relevant transformation of financial and ESG performance, actually which turn into financial over time. It is actually only reporting schemes combine financial and non-financial information and value creation and future strategy of the corporate. So as an asset management company, how useful do you find the companies to prepare integrated reporting? Could you please also your prediction for the future of ESG investment ecosystem? Is that included integrated perspective, integrated thinking?
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I mean, integrated reporting, can be just an exercise to put together to separate parts of the running of the company or the thinking about the business of the company, and that it's helpful because it comes in just one report, but doesn't help much. I think integrated reporting is very useful if it actually reflects, that the sustainable aspects has actually been successfully integrated in the company's strategy. I mean, these days it's more common to listen to companies talk about sustainability issues when they in their quarterly result presentation, but that wasn't the case 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So I think. I mean, the report itself, I think it's just the proof of whether or not these elements have been integrated into the company's strategy and culture. So again, it's useful, but I think only as a reflection of what the company is doing or not doing properly. On the issue of the future of the ESG investment space, I agree with Paul on this on the point he was making about values, about bringing values to the table in terms of investing, which is something that again wasn't done in the past. I think that on one side, I mean, the standards of reporting and the basic level of transparency of companies on a number of issues will increase, even for products that are not ESG. I mean, every single investment product will be operating in at a higher level of transparency and of awareness of certain issues. And I think the disclosure of this will be mainstream, I think, in most markets and in most financial products. I think the challenge is actually to be able to offer clients and to offer investors products that are aligned with their values and what they are trying to do. Again, in the European Union, from some point next year, we will be forced as distributor or as product factories to ask our clients, whether they want to invest along sustainable lines or not. And it's actually quite a challenge. It's much easier to come up with thematic offerings in certain, to come up with a clean energy fund or something like that, to offer your clients your full range of investment products and solutions with the level of sustainability that your clients say they want. And I think that's the big challenge for us as asset managers, more than coming up with specific products for specific industries or ideas. So I think that's the big challenge. And again, I think the regulation in the European Union is accelerating this process a lot. And I think it will be a very good thing, but it will be a huge challenge for asset managers and distributors in the near future.
Thank you very much. Actually, tomorrow at the same time with our session, we have a great session. We will discuss about global reporting system. One of the leader of this area is Mervyn King, will be our honorary guest, and Paul Druckmann also will moderate the session. Helen Brand, CEO of ACCA, and Jonathan Nebrey from IRRC and myself, we will discuss about the global reporting system. I think we will learn more tomorrow as well. Thank you. Rose, I would like to continue with you to learn the responsible investment environment side. of course, we know PRI has significant initiative in the market as well. Could you please share with us their contribution in terms of supporting the responsible investment environment individually? And also, if possible, I would like to ask you the same question that I posed to other panelists. What are your predictions for the future of responsible investment ecosystem? What is your perspective for future? Rose.
I think the two clear trends, which essentially are maybe, I guess, trends that the PRI are looking at and focusing on, and are trying to align some of their resources to, that I'm going to pull out because, as Paul Andrews said right at the very beginning, you could go in any direction with this, but I've taken two. I think the most obvious is climate mitigation. And obviously, this is going to be a theme that's so important for all investors, as we all know. And you know, having just come out from COP26, PRI actually spent a lot of time in preparation for this, as you would imagine, focusing around sort of a couple of clear areas. One is it went into COP26 with really asking for, I guess, calling for bold action by government for public policy to accelerate the global transition to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and then encouraging investors to set and implement their own strong near-term net zero targets. We've worked clearly very closely with our partners from the Glasgow Finance Sector Alliance for Net Zero. And in addition to that focus around essentially the asset owners, the PRI has also supported the launch of two new initiatives promoting net zero for the consultant community and the financial service providers, to make sure that entire sort of value chain is covered by a group that's driving this net zero ambition. The second sort of trend, I guess, is that we're starting to see increasing interest from asset owners as to how they can align their investment mandates with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And then this in itself raises the need to really analyze and understand sustainability performance and sort of measure that impact in context of sort of social and environmental outcomes. This requirement leads to the necessity for more consistent, reliable and comparable data to flow down that investment chain from the corporates through to the underlying beneficiaries to allow this measurement of impact. So to address this, the PRI's had a clear initiative labelled, and you may have heard of it, called Driving Meaningful Data, such as global corporate sustainable reporting. And in fact, again, going into COP, the PRI put forward some recommendations for, and Paul was talking about this earlier, the new International Sustainability Standard Pool that was obviously approved, which is fantastic. And the sort of last piece to that puzzle, I guess, is there needs to be a legal framework for impact to guide this alignment of sustainability goals to investment mandates. And again, the PRI has commissioned a report across 11 of the largest markets, seeking really to understand how far investors are allowed or required to go in considering sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I think the investment companies and asset managers easily reach you to learn more about the future strategy and perspective of PRI to work together as well. So in our final round, and I would like to pose the same question to all panelists as their closing remark. So the question is that, what are your specific recommendations for the capital markets and companies in emerging economies in terms of ESG integration strategies? Actually, I would like to hear your clear message for investors and investment companies, clear recommendation, maybe a little bit homework for us. Eduardo, can we start with you?
Yes. Well, I think as investors, when we try to scale up our ambition in sustainability, the first thing we did was setting up a set of investment beliefs. You know, the same thing you would do if you're putting together an investment process or an investment strategy. So I think it's very useful that one starts by setting up a set of beliefs, and some of them may be basic, but you need to express them in order for them to have value in whatever you're going to be building. I mean, for instance, things that we have talked about whether incorporating ESG elements into the investment process can generate alpha or can reduce risk, or, you know, all those sorts of things need to be put into place, because at the end of the day, we are still fiduciaries, so we need to have we need to have conviction on whether the extra elements we are putting into the process will add value to our clients. So that's one side of the story. For issuers in developing countries, I think my only piece of advice, and I mean, we are also local investors in some developing countries, in Mexico and in Turkey. I mean, I will encourage the companies to be proactive in building a constructive dialogue with the local investor base about their sustainability strategy. I think more important probably than filling a checklist or achieving a certain rating, I think issuers should make sure that they have a good understanding of the concerns and sensitivities that their main stockholders and bondholders are going to be incorporating to their investment process as they embrace sustainability. And I would encourage them to be proactive rather than reactive in this exercise. As local investors in developing countries, I think it's something that I think will speed things up a lot.
Thank you, very encouraging. Ross, could I continue with you to hear PRI message?
Yes, absolutely. I think sort of advice would be that creating an enabling environment to attract more long-term responsible institutional capital has got to be an important step for any emerging market economies. And I think, you know, Turkish investors here can play a crucial role in driving good domestic responsible investment practices within the Turkish market. And I think, you know, we've touched on some of these just now, and Eduardo touched on some of these points, but essentially you've got like this food chain comprised of the key market participants, your asset owners, your investment managers, and the corporates themselves. And they've each got a set of actions that they need to carry out. So, you know, asset owners have this fiduciary duty, and therefore, you know, this idea, we talk about investment beliefs as an investment manager. Well, asset owners too need to write their own responsible investment policy, integrating ESG into those investment objectives and beliefs, and then sort of set out those clear expectations in terms of reporting and disclosure, and then again reflect that when they're selecting and appointing and monitoring their investment managers. And then you sort of flow down the chain, and then you've got the investment managers obviously needing to integrate ESG into their investment processes. And again, Eduardo, you know, highlighted some of the challenges of that, trying to do that in the mainstream. But I think one of the key things that investment managers need to do to help is use their shareholder rights to influence and hold these companies account for their responsible investment practices via their voting and engagement practices. And then the corporates, obviously, they then get encouraged by the chain above, the investment managers and the asset owners, to start providing ESG disclosures in their own financial statements. Then these can be monitored and compared company to company. And to support all of that, there needs to be that sustainable taxonomy and that right sort of national or regional sort of sustainable financial strategies that encourages and enables the corporates in this transition to sort of lower carbon operations and their deliveries of SDGs. So I think there's a number of benefits for any emerging market country in taking these steps. It makes them more sort of attractive to global investors, and it creates that sort of sustainable financial system that will generate sort of long-term value creation. And sort of the final word from the PRI is, that sounds like a lot of things everyone's got to do, but the good news is the PRI has got all the resources to guide all types of investors to achieve this. We're very much a big tent organization network where we share practices very easily across borders. And in fact, in the sort of 2020-2021 year, 3 of our 4 fastest growing regions in terms of new signatories were actually here in emerging markets. And here in Turkey, we're obviously delighted to be working with a number of our signatories, including the private equity arm, Actera Group, who are actually in fact one of our long-standing signatories, having become a PRI signatory back in 2010. So, access to this network I describe is one of the key benefits for each of your organizations when you become a signatory to the PRI.
Thank you, Rose. It was very clear message for also Turkish investment companies. Thank you. Paul, could I get your opinion as a professional who also knows the emerging capital markets very well? Could I get your opinion briefly?
I have to, and I know we're short on time, but let me leave the participants with 2 brief messages. The first is a message for investors, both retail and institutional, and it's to demand more. Demand more of the companies you invest in, demand more of your intermediaries, and demand more of yourselves, because all investors need to be informed on these issues to be able to engage in meaningful discussions with those that represent them from an intermediary point of view and from the companies that they invest in. For market participants and for regulators and policymakers, my message there is use this opportunity as a way for capital market development. In my time at IOSCO, we always had discussions with emerging market leaders about how they can develop their markets to be more robust and more meaningful for their populations. Use ESG as an opportunity to develop the markets in a new and meaningful way. You have an opportunity here to leapfrog what many of the developed markets are just now doing. Take advantage of it, seize the opportunity, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. I think we completed our time. I'd like to thank you for all speakers, including, of course, Paul Drachman. This is 5th Turkish Capital Market Summit, and it is a very impactful summit, and we are organizing every year. We are happy to contribute for these big organizations, and also congratulate all committee members and executives. This is such a important organization. I'm also the chair of Integrated Reporting Association Turkey. I'm happy to contribute on the behalf of my association. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.